Good morning, class. Welcome to Criminology. If you would turn to Chapter 5 in your book, I will lecture today's lesson on the chapter titled Biosocial and Other Contemporary Perspectives. I encourage you to have your book and notebook and paper available for taking notes. This lecture begins discussing the Human Genome Project. This is an international research program designed to construct detailed maps of the human genome. Genome refers to genes. Now, the HGP, Human Genome Project, it was the beginning of research into human biology and understanding disease, behavior, and human nature. So, looking at the biosocial component, we're talking about biology and social components of society. The human genome refers to a complete copy of a person's human gene instructions. Genes are made up of DNA, and it carries different coded instructions for making every person who they are. We have chromosomes that are bundled in the genes, and remember we talked about chromosomes is a determination of your gender identity. It focuses also on differences and variants from one person from another. So hair color, height, eye color, shape, size. Those are some other genetic components that are found and studied in the Human Genome Project. In terms of criminal justice, genetic knowledge has a significant implication. There are a lot of questions about the role of genetics in behavior. We've discussed some in class, and this chapter starts to focus a little bit more on information to support whether public policy options are related to crime prevention or offender treatment, or is there some genetic component? I'm on page 99. We'll start discussing genetics and hereditability. Research in the Netherlands by this guy named Ropers and Brunner started to study criminal families. And they studied one family with focusing on the male descendants, meaning all the male members in the family, that had a near normal IQ. And it showed that within that family they had a high number of arrests for violations of the criminal law. So in their study, they suggest that because most males have only one X chromosome, that they're more vulnerable to a defective gene, while women who have two X chromosomes have sort of a backup system, claiming that this gene is responsible for that extra chromosome is responsible for a family's criminality. Another thing that they studied was something referred to as MAOA, monoamine oxidine. And this is just a chemical that breaks down the neurotransmitters serotonin and noradrenaline amounts in your body. Now, we've heard of adrenaline in terms of excitement or in situations where you have less time to react. It tends to be a chemical that makes you respond, maybe not in a rational way. There have been instances where a young girl had saw a car fall on her father while he was working on the vehicle, and she actually lifted the vehicle off of her father. And that was linked to adrenaline. So Ropers and Brunner suggest that there's some impact of chemical imbalance that can be linked to aggressive behavior. So in fact, if the body doesn't produce enough, then the brain may be overwhelmed with stimulation, which can lead to uncontrollable urges and criminal behavior. So this chemical makeup could have some type of effect on a person's behavior. Then researchers at the University of Texas discovered that there may be a pleasure-seeking gene that can play a role in deviant behavior. The gene is normally involved in controlling dopamine flow. This is when you have it's more like a brain chemical that gives people a sense of satisfaction, like using drugs or drinking. They feel like that urge is the only way that they can feel satisfied or whole or well. And typically in this study, the University of Texas, they said that this particular brain chemical can contribute to whether a person needs that extra chemical to satisfy a drinking or drug using habit. Okay, don't remember all these names for your lecture. I need you to just focus more on the biosocial and some of these different theories that are coming out of these studies. The next thing, and I'm on page 100, something else that they considered in that study is whether childhood maltreatment could be a risk for growing up to become a criminal. And maltreatment, we know that mal means bad, wrong. So wrong treatment of a child, those experiences, whether or not they play a role into an adult later in their life choices of becoming a criminal. Well, this study hypothesized that the development of antisocial behavior could be responsible or led to be responsible from some genetic defect, but also it could be a response to maltreatment in an environmental situation. The study revealed that children with high MAOA did not develop antisocial behavior. So other researchers have also found that biosocial interaction between the MAOA and early child abuse did lead to violence later in life. Basically, in some cases, it appears that genetic predispositions or interaction can lead to delinquency, and delinquency is committing criminal acts as a minor. So where does the future direction of the study of genes and crime lead to? Page 101. It appears to be linked more to specific environments. Okay? And if the population or an environment changes, then they look at hereditary contributions that may have also played a role. So now the genes can appear to be both the cause and a consequence rather than the main determination. So it can't just be from your genes, but it could be a combination of both the environment as well as something hereditary. So let's focus now on the dysfunctional brain. Page 102 and 103. Some researchers have explored brain dysfunction as it relates to criminality. Now, some researchers use what they call PET scans to examine the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And they found that murderers did have a lower level of glucose in that prefrontal cortex of the brain. So when they studied the brains of convicted murderers, they found that they had a much lower level of glucose in their brain. And that dysfunction could be a result in different social and educational problems that they may have experienced. Uh, may not necessarily be a direct cause of crime, but it can make a person predisposed to crime and violence. There were other studies that led to frontal brain hypothesis that a gene defect can lead to communication breakdown and make people um, predisposed to like schizophrenia. And they found that there have been studies to show that there is a connection between heredity and schizophrenia. Now, some other brain mechanisms can also be involved when we're talking about aggression. Food allergies. Food allergies and food additives have also been associated with criminal violence. You can have allergic reactions to some foods that can lead to the swelling of the brain stem, which can reduce the amount of learning during a childhood and contribute to delinquency and adult crime. We know that people can have food allergies that can contribute to their behavior in many other different ways that aren't criminal. So that theory isn't far-fetched. And then physical injuries, emotional trauma, disease, long-term exposure to stress can also lead to changes in the brain. Stressors in the social environment are sometimes linked to brain structure. But recently, some scientists have started to look at what they call neuroplasticity, and that's part of the brain, to explain why some people experience significant personality changes while they're undergoing new experiences. That whole neuroplasticity suggests that the brain can change its structure and function in response to a new experience. And let's see, anything else? Scientists also suggest that brain can become adaptable to certain types of stimuli. So if you change certain environments, that your brain can start to change and adapt to a new situation and start to respond differently. Much like the only example that comes to mind is I know that some people who may be smokers, if a female becomes pregnant, she can never stop smoking, but all of a sudden when she's pregnant, she doesn't smoke, and there has to be some chemical and brain reaction to that leads her to think that she can quit, but as soon as the baby's born, she may resume her habit again. So there's some kind of thought process behind that you can have some adaptability in the brain to certain stimuli. In that situation, a pregnancy would be the stimuli, and stop smoking during that time period could be how the brain changes. Okay, page 105, body chemistry and criminality. We're looking at ingested substances. Ingested means things that you swallow or take into the body. And nutrition, page 106. Hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, has been linked to hyperactivity, aggressiveness, and crime. However, at the moment, the evidence regarding sugar's impact on behavior is unclear. Some food additives like MSG, food dyes, artificial flavorings have been also linked in producing criminal violence. What about caffeine and sugar? We always talk about how they get you hyped up, and we don't like kids to have too much caffeine and sugar because it keeps them too hyper. Well, caffeine and sugar may trigger antisocial behavior, although research is unclear to that direct relationship. Diets deficient in various vitamins and other nutrients can also increase aggressiveness and agitation and open up a door to crime. The relationship between other nutrients like omega-3s, omega-6, fatty acids, and other behaviors have also been associated with behavior. Environmental pollution. There are many different substances found in the environment that have been linked to criminal behavior. A 1997 research study suggested that high levels of various environmental and industrial pollutants, particularly lead, may cause people to commit violent crimes. Today, it's illegal for anyone to have lead-based paints or use lead-based paints or certain types of chemicals that were used maybe a long time ago before they were able to identify that there was a negative impact on development physically or educationally or otherwise. Also, prenatal substance exposure to marijuana, tobacco smoke, alcohol appears to be linked to problems both in childhood and later in life. Hormones and criminality. Page 109. Hormone. What is a hormone? Well, it's a chemical substance produced by the body that regulates and controls the activity of certain cells or organs. Testosterone is a male sex hormone that has been linked to aggression. Okay? And also appears to play a role towards violence and aggression amongst men. Now, most research consistently have shown a relationship between high blood testosterone levels and increased male aggressiveness, although it may be mediated by the influence of testosterone and social integration. There is somewhat of a link associated with high levels of blood testosterone that increases male aggressiveness. So where they've tested that and identified a male who carries a large dosage of testosterone, and this could be linked to what we studied last chapter, the super male XYY theory, that it makes them even more aggressive. Now, some changes in testosterone levels in women have also been linked to changes in personality and sexual behavior, but a lot of the research is limited. Some fluctuations in the level of female hormones may have also had a relationship to certain law violations. We do know that hormonal changes in women does change their behavior physically, mentally, emotionally. Serotonin. Serotonin is a chemical that affects the nerves that transmits to the brain and tells it what to do. Has shown to be more aggressive behavior in men who have that high testosterone level and low serotonin in the brain. One study did find that enhancing brain levels of serotonin was linked to decreased aggression and impulsivity. So the higher your serotonin levels are, the less aggressive and impulsive a person may be. They found that, they concluded that study between serotonin and behavior. Other hormones, let's see, like thyroid hormones, T3s, have also been found to be related to delinquency and poor impulse control. Higher levels of oxytocin, which we refer to as the trust hormone, appears to make people more trusting. Researchers have suggested that, like, con men might use this to manipulate their victims. So people who have a high level of that chemical may trust at a greater level than someone with just a normal level of oxytocin. What about climate, weather, and crime? Could these environmental impacts have an effect on behavior? I'm on page 112 and 113. Well, research has shown that there is a relationship between weather and criminal behavior. It suggests that the temperature is the only weather variable consistently and reliably related to crime. Before I continue, which season do you think crime is greater? Fall, spring, summer, or winter? Certainly the summer. Field research has also focused on a correlation between temperature and violent crime. And now that we've locked down a season, what temperature do you think the colder temperatures or the hotter temperatures are greater link to more violent crime? Well, typically the warmer weather. It's usually the hot weather that contributes to more crime. What about the time of day? Day of the week. We know the weekends are usually busier than weekdays when we're talking about crime. Nighttime versus daytime. We know nighttime seems to be more a popular time for increased crime. So definitely the climate weather has some correlation to crime, especially those crimes like assault, property offenses, domestic violence, disorderly conduct. Those are some of the popular ones. The theory that seems to come up is routine activities theory, or that lifestyle theory. You know, you have uncomfortably hot temperatures. Most people are socializing and together, opposed to cold temperatures where people are less together and more apart, reducing their contact. Can contribute whether crime is high or low. Also, let's see what else. Some other factors that could contribute. Oh, if you have a rainy or snow season, that tends to reduce some of the criminal activity. Or, you know, there's a correlation between the weather when it's usually cold, wet, or raining. Okay, let's move on to biosocial criminology, page 113. In 1985, a man named James Wilson and Richard Herrnstein wrote Crime and Human Nature, looking at biological criminology. And the purpose of the book was to try and start discussions on biological causes of crime and move away from the totally sociological explanation. And they looked at a few different factors that they thought might contribute to crime, including gender, age, body type, intelligence, and personality. They also recognized some social factors, but suggested that these factors didn't predispose people to one over the other. Another criminologist, Andrew Walsh, also was a big proponent of biosocial criminology, emphasized the importance of interaction between biology and the environment in determining behavioral responses in certain situations. He said that biological factors do not operate in an environmental vacuum, meaning they can't happen by itself. The environment factor has to be a part of coming up with why people act a certain way, and vice versa. The environment is just not enough. That there is some biological component that contributes to the outcome of certain behavior. You can't separate the two, as it is part of what his theory discussed. Gender differences in criminology. Now, the gender ratio problem relates to the differences between female and male rates of offending. Now, which one do we believe commits crime at a greater level? Well, of course, most people might say males tend to offend more. And for nearly all crimes, the number of crimes committed by men far exceeds the number of crimes committed by women. But the data on the extent of male to female criminality has been surprisingly stable over time. Culture has definitely played a role in determining criminality in terms of the proportion of women participating in crime. Cultural changes that have created new opportunities for women in crime. Just think about 30, 40 years ago, being divorced or a single parent was not socially acceptable. So now that you have single parents, and that cultural change has influenced the roles and the types of jobs that women can pursue, it certainly changed the family dynamic We came up with latchkey kids. There's a host of other factors that have come out of the role of women changing in the past, I'd say 40 some odd years. Um, and with that cultural change, criminality has been something that has definitely increased for or explained why more women have um, uh, contributed to the crime rates for women. You know, women being more involved in committing crimes. Let's see. Evolutionary theory, page 117. Let's look at the evolutionary perspective. Well, this perspective looks to explain behavior based on human evolutionary history. Now, when we're talking about evolution, folks, this is a non-religious perspective of how humans came to be. Most people, or this one person, Charles Darwin, came up with the theory that we all evolved from apes. So there's this natural instinct in us, like other animals, that can have some genetic component to contributing to the way we behave. So if you look at the evolutionary theory, they say that it explains behavior because we are instinctive and that we respond to the environment in a certain way that is natural to us. Like the caveman, I mean, you know, you beat your chest and you do things that might be more impulsive, and you think later. And if you have to feed your family or get something or take care of, protect your family, you beat them over the head, you take them down, and you do what's necessary. So they say those urges are very natural to our primitive being, like from early, you know, all these years ago. How they say that humans came to evolve. That's just another theory. Okay, in wrapping up some of this, MIT, Massachusetts Institute in Technology, talks about some other biological theories. I'm on page 118. And there's this scientist at their school that suggests that there are 3 myths that have replaced this whole biological discussion. He says the myth of the blank slate holds that the human mind has no innate traits, that the personality is fully adaptable by society. Well, that blank slate theory that we discussed early on, I think it was John Locke that said that we all start with a blank slate, and that the environment starts to shape and form our personality. He thinks that's a myth, that we come in that way. There has to be some genetic contribution to the makeup of our personality. Also, he says that the myth of human nature says that everybody is essentially good from the start, that he believes that that's also a myth. And lastly, he says that this theory that each person has an individual soul-like quality that can make choices and be completely independent of some biological predisposition, much like we discussed with the rational choice theory. He believes that that's a myth. So these are some of the criticisms that he has with the biological basis of human behavior. He clearly does not agree that you can't ignore some of the criticisms. Let's see here. There's one other researcher that talks about there are almost certainly no genes for criminal behavior, but genes may affect brain functioning in ways that can increase or reduce the chances of individuals learning behavior patterns that can result in criminal behavior. But there is no gene that says that you're predisposed to becoming a criminal. But there can be some effect on, your brain activity or functioning, like the adrenaline, the serotonin, the MAOA, all those chemicals can make some contribution to your behavior. Now, other criticisms of the biological and biosocial theories as we wrap up on page 118 says that they fail to accurately predict criminality and not try and understand the actual causes. They're looking at one little thing and says that it predicts criminality, but they're not looking at other factors. Also, another criticism is the difficulty in looking at different regions, different environments. So like when we look at certain parts of the country, folks, like we get to benefit from all 4 seasons here in DC. But there are other parts of the country that may not. They might be 1-2 season areas. So they might have the best of spring and summer. And then you might have other places that might get the best of fall, winter, no spring and summer. So when we're talking about those other environmental factors, they're saying you can't. What did we do with that? What does that say? When we're saying that the crime is greater when it's hot and during the summer, and then you have places where they didn't even look at whether or not they were in places where there's a summer or high temperatures. Also, another criticism is they say these biological or biosocial theories do not account for changes in crime rates over time among different age groups within the same population. They also admitted that it doesn't focus on environmental and chemical precursors to crime that can happen outside of the biological components. So like the lead paint being exposure or other chemicals in our environment that we may use or in our communities that might have had some effect on development just from the exposure. And then lastly, one major criticism of many of these criminologists who have these biological and biosocial theories is that they've been accused of racial and class bias, that they're only looking at certain categories of people and trying to come up with a theory that fits for those segments of populations. And that's not fitting for everybody, then that theory is not good. Okay, that concludes the overview of Chapter 5. What I would like for you to do is I'd like for you to, as your assignment for your next class, is to answer the 5 questions at the end of the chapter. Well, I'm sorry, 6 questions at the end of your chapter. There are 6 questions you should be prepared to discuss when I return. I know that you all are also working on your research project. You should check Blackboard or your email to confirm your killer. Again, you can listen to this over and over again, take notes. It's covering Chapter 5. And when we return next week for on-ground classes, we will begin with the presentation of your serial killer research project. And then we'll pick back up and resume Chapter 5 once the presentations have been completed. I hope that you all have enjoyed your spring break, and I hope that you take advantage of this week to stay on top of everything that needs to be done, your project, as well as the questions at the end of Chapter 5. Take care, and thank you, and I'll see you soon.